The first thing Jarl Rurik noticed about the prisoner was not his scars, though there were many, or his size, though he was smaller than most of the warriors who had dragged him in. It was his eyes. The other prisoners had wept, begged, groveled. They had offered gold they did not have and promises they could not keep. They had fallen to their knees the moment they were shoved into the great hall, their foreheads pressing against the cold stone floor as if they were already dead. But this one stood straight, even with his hands bound behind his back, even with blood dripping from a gash on his forehead, even with the weight of a dozen Viking warriors surrounding him. He looked at Rurik, not with fear, not with hatred, but with something that looked almost like amusement. As if the great Jarl Rurik, the Iron Fist, the man who had never lost a battle and never spared a foe who begged, was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Rurik had seen many prisoners in his years as chieftain. He had broken them with hunger, with cold, with the lash, with the slow drip of water on their foreheads, until their minds shattered like glass. He had watched them crumble, watched them weep, watched them crawl across the floor to kiss his boots. He had enjoyed it once. But that was before he had learned that breaking others did not fix what was broken inside himself. That was before he had realized that every man he shattered left a crack in his own soul, and after 20 years there was not much left of him that was not fractured. Still, he was curious about this one. He wanted to see if this man, with his straight back and his steady gaze, would be the first to resist. He wanted to know what it would take to make him fall. "What is your name?" Rurik asked. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together in a fast-moving river. He sat on his high seat, his arms crossed over his massive chest, his gray-black eyes fixed on the prisoner. The firelight flickered across his face, illuminating the web of scars that covered his cheeks and forehead, the deep furrow that ran from his left temple to his right jaw. The prisoner did not answer immediately. He looked around the great hall, at the weapons on the walls, the furs on the floor, the skulls of fallen enemies mounted on wooden poles, the warriors who watched him with hungry eyes, their hands resting on their axe handles. Then he looked back at Rurik, and he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose. "My name is Darian," he said. His voice was calm, steady, as if he were introducing himself at a market fair, rather than standing in the presence of his captor. "Son of no one you would know, brother to men you have killed, friend to a woman you will never meet because she died in a raid much like the one that brought me here." He tilted his head, studying Rurik with those dark, unblinking eyes. "And you are Rurik, called the Iron Fist, the man who has never lost, the man who breaks everyone." He laughed, a short to a sharp sound that echoed off the wooden walls. "You look tired." The hall went silent. The warriors stared at Darian as if he had just spit on the altar of their gods. Someone drew a knife, someone else reached for an axe. But Rurik did not move, he did not speak. He simply looked at this prisoner, this man who dared to mock him, and he felt something he had not felt in years. Interest. Not anger, not the cold fury that usually accompanied defiance. Just interest. "You have courage," Rurik said finally, "or stupidity. I have not yet decided which." "Perhaps both," Darian said. "My mother used to say that the bravest people are often the most foolish. It takes a kind of madness to believe that the world can be better than it is." He shifted his weight, his bound hands pulling at his shoulders, and a flicker of pain crossed his face. "Are you going to kill me? If so, please get on with it. I have been standing for hours and my feet hurt. Also, I have not eaten since yesterday, and I am starting to get cranky." The warriors muttered among themselves. Some reached for their axes, but Rurik raised a hand and they fell silent. "I am not going to kill you," he said. "I am going to keep you. You will serve me. You will clean my boots, fetch my food, light my pipe and sharpen my axes, and every day I will ask you if you are ready to kneel. And every day you will say no, and we will see who grows tired first." Darian looked at him for a long moment. Then he shrugged, as much as a man with bound hands could shrug. "Fine," he said. "But I warn you, I'm a terrible cook. I have been told that I snore and I have a habit of talking in my sleep. If I start reciting poetry, just ignore me. It is a nervous habit." Rurik stared at him. Then, despite himself, he laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused and unfamiliar, like a door creaking open after years of disuse. The warriors looked at each other in confusion. That chieftain did not laugh. That chieftain had not laughed in years. "Take him to my tent," Rurik ordered, still chuckling. "Cut his bonds, give him food and water, and someone find him a blanket. He looks half frozen. He looks half frozen, and I cannot have my new servant dying of frostbite before he has even polished a single boot." The days that followed were unlike anything Rurik had experienced in his years as chieftain. Darian did his chores, grudgingly, with muttered complaints and exaggerated sighs, but he never knelt. He never said, "Yes, Jarl," or "As you command." He called Rurik by his name as if they were equals, and he met every attempt at intimidation with a dry joke or a raised eyebrow. When Rurik ordered him to clean the mud off his boots, Darian spent an hour polishing them to a shine that was somehow both perfect and insulting, then presented them with a theatrical bow that was clearly mocking. When Rurik told him to fetch water from the river, Darian brought back a single cup, took a long drink from it himself, and then handed the rest to the Jarl with a grin. "You are the most infuriating man I have ever met," Rurik said one evening, after Darian had spent the entire dinner making sarcastic comments about the quality of the food. "Thank you," Darian said. "I try." Rurik leaned back in his chair and studied him. The prisoner had cleaned up well. His dark hair was tied back from his face, revealing high cheekbones and a strong jaw. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and they held a light that no amount of hardship had been able to extinguish. He was not handsome in the way of the Southern lords, too rough, too scarred, but there was something about him that drew the eye, something that made Rurik want to keep looking. Something that made him forget for a moment that this man was his enemy. "Why do you not kneel?" Rurik asked. "It would be easier, a simple gesture, and you would have your freedom. I would let you go. I would give you a horse and supplies and send you south. Why do you refuse? What are you proving? And to whom?" Darian sat down on the stool across from Rurik, without being invited. The Jarl did not object. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the tent. "Because I made a promise," Darian said. His voice was quieter now, the humor gone, replaced by something deeper, something heavier. "To someone I loved, someone who died in my arms." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Her name was Ilara. She was not my wife, not my sister. She was my comrade, my partner, the only person in the world who ever looked at me and saw someone worth something. We fought together for years. We bled together. We saved each other's lives more times than I can count." Rurik leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What happened to her?" Darian's hands clenched into fists. "She died in a raid. A Viking raid, much like the one that killed your people and brought me here. We were outnumbered, surrounded. She took an arrow meant for me, and she fell in my arms." He swallowed hard, his throat working. "And before she died, she made me promise something. She made me promise that I would never let anyone break me, that I would never kneel to anyone, no matter how powerful, no matter how cruel, because if I knelt, if I broke, then her death would mean nothing. Her faith in me would be a lie. Everything she sacrificed would be for nothing." Rurik was silent for a long moment. The fire popped and crackled, sending sparks up into the darkness. He thought of his own past, of the years he had spent as a prisoner, of the day he had knelt to save his own life. He thought of the shame that had followed him ever since, the way he had tried to drown it in blood and battle, the way it had festered inside him like a wound that would not heal. "I knelt once," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. He had never told anyone this. Not his closest advisors, not his most trusted warriors, but something about Darian made him want to speak the truth. "I was young, younger than you. I was captured by a rival chieftain, a man named Skoll. He was cruel, even by Viking standards. He gave me a choice, kneel or die. I thought about refusing. I thought about spitting in his face and letting him kill me. But I was young, and I was afraid, and I wanted to live. So I knelt." Darian's eyes widened slightly, but he said nothing. He simply waited. Rurik continued, his voice rough. "I thought I would survive, that I would find a way to escape, to get my revenge, but I never did. Skoll kept me for 3 years. 3 years of humiliation, of degradation, of being treated like less than a dog, And when I finally escaped, when I finally killed him and took his place, I was not the same person who had knelt. The shame had turned into something else, something ugly. It made me cruel. It made me cold. It made me want to break everyone else, so that I would not have to remember that I had been broken myself. Darian looked at him, and for the first time there was no mockery in his gaze. There was only understanding, and something that looked almost like compassion. "You survived," he said softly. "That is not nothing. You survived and you built something. A warband, a stronghold, a legend. You are not the same man who knelt. You are someone new, someone who has grown." He leaned forward, his dark eyes holding Rurik's. "The question is not whether you knelt. The question is whether you are still kneeling, inside, to the fear that has driven you all these years, to the shame that has made you into something you never wanted to be." Rurik stared at him. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever seen past the armor, past the scars, past the legend of the Iron Fist. He did not know whether to be angry or grateful. His hand tightened on the arm of his chair, and for a moment he wanted to strike this man, to wipe that knowing look off his face. But he did not. Instead, he felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been frozen for so long he had forgotten it was there. "You are strange," he said finally, "strange and infuriating and entirely too honest." Darian smiled, and this time the smile was real. "I have been told that before, usually by people who were about to try to kill me." He stood up and stretched, wincing as his muscles protested. "Now, if you will excuse me, I've been polishing boots for 3 hours, and my back hurts. I'm going to sleep. Try not to have any nightmares about the people you have wronged. It is bad for the digestion." He walked out of the tent, leaving Rurik alone with his thoughts. The Jarl sat in the darkness for a long time, staring at the dying embers of the fire, and he wondered if it was possible for a man to change. He wondered if it was possible for him to become something other than what he had made himself. He wondered if Darian, this strange, infuriating, impossible man, might be the key to unlocking the cage he had built around his own heart. The weeks that followed were a slow, painful dance of proximity and resistance. Rurik found himself seeking out Darian's company, making excuses to talk to him, to hear his dry observations about the camp and its inhabitants. He found himself looking forward to the evenings when the work was done and they could sit by the fire and simply be together. Darian, for his part, seemed to tolerate the Jarl's presence with a kind of weary amusement, as if he were humoring a particularly persistent child. But there were moments, small moments, fleeting, when their eyes met, and something passed between them. Something that was not quite friendship and not quite hatred. Something that made Rurik's chest ache in a way he did not understand. One night, a rival warband attacked the camp. The assault came at midnight, the enemy warriors pouring over the walls with torches and axes, their war cries splitting the darkness. Rurik woke to the sound of screaming and the clash of steel. He grabbed his axe and ran out of his tent, his heart pounding, his blood singing with the familiar thrill of battle. He fought like a demon, his axe singing a song of death, cutting down one man after another. But there were too many of them. They kept coming, wave after wave, and Rurik was separated from his men, driven back toward the edge of the camp. Then his horse was struck by an arrow. The animal screamed and fell, pinning Rurik's leg beneath its massive body. He struggled to free himself, but the weight was too much. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and he could feel blood soaking through his trousers. An enemy warrior appeared above him, his face twisted with triumph, his axe raised for the killing blow. Rurik closed his eyes. He thought of all the things he had never said, all the things he had never done. He thought of Darian. And then Darian was there. The prisoner had somehow freed himself from his bonds. Rurik would later learn that he had been sharpening a hidden blade against the stone for days, waiting for an opportunity, and he threw himself between the Jarl and the enemy. He had no weapon, no armor, no plan. He simply used his body as a shield, taking a slash across his arm that would have taken Rurik's head. Blood sprayed across the snow, hot and red. Darian staggered but did not fall. He grabbed a fallen sword from the ground and drove it into the enemy's chest with a scream of pure primal fury. The warrior fell, and Darian turned to Rurik. "Get up," he said, his voice tight with pain. I cannot carry you. You weigh as much as a horse." Rurik pushed against the dead animal, and with Darian's help he managed to drag himself free. They stumbled to a nearby tent, and Darian tore strips from his own shirt to bind Rurik's wound. The Jarl had taken a gash to his side deep enough to see bone, and the blood was flowing freely, pooling on the ground beneath him. Darian's hands were steady as he worked, pressing cloth against the wound, tying it tight. "You saved me," Rurik said, staring at Darian as if seeing him for the first time. "You could have run. You could have let me die. You could have taken a horse and ridden south to freedom. Why did you not run?" Darian's hands did not pause. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear. "Because I do not let people die in my arms," he said. "Not anymore. I have done that once. I will not do it again." He tied off the bandage and sat back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Even if that person is you, even if you are my enemy, even if you deserve to die for what you have done to my people." He looked at Rurik, and his dark eyes were soft. "You are still a person. You still have a chance to be something more than what you have been, and I could not live with myself if I let that chance slip away." Rurik reached out and took Darian's hand. His fingers were rough and calloused, stained with blood, but his grip was gentle. "I do not understand you," he said. "I have never met anyone like you. You should hate me. You should want me dead. Instead, you saved my life. Why?" Darian squeezed his hand. "Because hate is easy," he said. "Love is hard, and I have spent my whole life taking the easy path. I am tired of it. I want to try something different." He smiled, and despite the pain and the blood and the chaos of the battle, the smile was real. "Now stop talking and let me finish bandaging you. You are bleeding all over my tent, and I just cleaned it." The attack was repelled, and the camp returned to an uneasy peace. But something had changed between the Jarl and his prisoner. Rurik no longer asked Darian to kneel. He no longer gave him demeaning chores. He invited Darian to sit beside him at meals, to walk with him around the camp, to talk with him late into the night. The warriors noticed, and they did not approve. A man named Hakon, who had been Rurik's second-in-command for years, watched the growing closeness with cold, jealous eyes. Hakon had been with Rurik since the beginning. He had helped him escape from Skoll, had helped him build the warband, had helped him become the Iron Fist. And he saw Darian as a threat, not just to Rurik, but to everything they had built together. "He is bewitching you," Hakon said to Rurik in private, his voice low and urgent. "He is making you weak. The men are talking. They say the Iron Fist has gone soft. They say you have forgotten what it means to be a Viking." He stepped closer, his eyes burning. "You need to kill him, Rurik, before he destroys everything." Rurik shook his head. "He is not bewitching me. He is showing me something I had forgotten, something about what it means to be human." He looked at Hakon, and his gray-black eyes were hard. "I will not kill him. He saved my life. He has earned the right to live." Hakon's jaw tightened. "You are a fool," he said, "and your foolishness will destroy us all." One night, a blizzard struck the camp. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and the snow fell so thickly that Rurik could not see his hand in front of his face. He was in his tent, alone, when the storm tore through the canvas and ripped it from its poles. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, freezing the blood in his veins. He gathered what furs he could and stumbled toward the nearest shelter, Darian's tent. He did not ask permission. He simply pushed through the opening and collapsed onto the furs beside the prisoner. "The storm," he said by way of explanation, his teeth chattering. "My tent is gone. I have nowhere else to go." Darian looked at him, at the snow melting in his hair, at the blood seeping through his bandages, at the way his hands shook with cold. "You are an idiot," he said. "You could have gone to any tent. There are a dozen warriors who would have taken you in. You came here." "Yes," Rurik said, "I came here." They lay side by side in the darkness, the storm raging around them. The tent was small, and there was no room for distance. Their bodies pressed together for warmth, and Rurik could feel Darian's heartbeat through the thin fabric of their shirts, steady, strong, alive. The wind howled outside, but inside there was only the sound of their breathing, the warmth of their bodies, the quiet intimacy of two people huddled against the cold. "Are you afraid of dying?" Darian asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rurik thought about it. He had faced death 100 times, had stared into its eyes and never flinched. But now, lying here with Darien, he felt something he had not felt in years, fear. Not of death itself, but of losing something he had only just found. "I was not," he said. "Not for a long time. I thought I had nothing to lose. I thought I had already lost everything that mattered." He paused, his throat tight. "But now I am not so sure." "Why?" "Because I have something to lose now." He turned his head and looked at Darien, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath on his cheek. "You." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. The storm raged outside, but inside, time seemed to stop. Darien reached out and touched Rurik's face, his fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. "I do not know what this is," he said. "I do not know if it is right or wrong or something in between. I do not know if it is love or desperation or just the cold making us say things we do not mean." He paused, his thumb brushing across Rurik's cheek. "But I know that I do not want to be alone anymore. And I know that when I am with you, I do not feel like a prisoner, I feel like a person." Rurik leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative, a question rather than a demand. Darien's lips were cold, but they warmed under his, and the kiss deepened. Rurik had kissed people before, women, men, prisoners, warriors, but it had always been about power, about control, about taking what he wanted. This was different. This was giving. This was offering himself to someone else and hoping that he would be accepted. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I love you," Rurik said. The words felt strange in his mouth, unfamiliar. He had not said them to anyone in years. He had not thought he was capable of saying them at all. "I know it is too soon. I know we are enemies. I know I have no right to ask, but I love you, Darien, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me." Darien touched his face, his thumb brushing away a tear that Rurik had not realized he was shedding. "You do not have to prove anything," he said. "You just have to stay. Stay with me. Do not let the darkness win. Do not go back to being the Iron Fist. Be the man I saw in this tent tonight. Be the man who laughed at my jokes and held me in the storm. Be that man, and I will stay with you forever." Rurik pulled him close and held him, and they slept through the storm wrapped in each other's arms. But the peace did not last. Hakon had been plotting. He had made a secret alliance with a rival warband, promising to open the gates in exchange for Rurik's head, and he had been spreading lies about Darien, telling the warriors that the prisoner was a spy, that he had been sent to destroy them from within, that he was using the Jarl's affection to weaken the warband. When the attack came, it was not from outside. It was from inside. Hakon and his followers seized Darien in the night and dragged him to the center of the camp. "This man is a traitor," Hakon announced to the gathered warriors, his voice carrying across the sleeping tents. "He has been feeding information to our enemies. He must die." Rurik pushed through the crowd, his face pale, his hand on his axe. "Release him," he commanded. "He is innocent. I have seen his writings. I have read his words. He is not a spy. He is a prisoner. Nothing more." Hakon sneered. "You are blind, Jarl, blinded by love for an enemy. The men have seen it, they have talked, they are afraid that you have lost your way, that you have forgotten what it means to be a Viking." He drew his sword, the blade glinting in the torchlight. "I am doing what is best for the warband, what you no longer have the strength to do." Darien looked at Rurik, and his eyes were calm. There was no fear in them, no pleading, no desperation. Just acceptance. "Do not fight for me," he said. "If I die, I die. It is not the worst thing that could happen. I have lived a good life. I have loved. I have been loved. That is enough. That is more than most people ever get." Rurik shook his head. "It is not enough," he said. "Not for me. Not for us." He turned to face Hakon, his gray-black eyes blazing. "You have betrayed me. You have plotted against the man I love. You have tried to turn my own warband against me. You have broken every oath you ever swore." He stepped closer and Hakon took a step back, his confidence crumbling. "You have until the count of 3 to drop your sword and kneel. 1. Hakon's hand trembled. "You have gone mad." He spat, but his voice was higher now, edged with panic. "He has poisoned your mind. He has turned you against your own people. 2. Hakon, listen to me. 3. Hakon dropped his sword, It clattered to the ground and he fell to his knees, his face pale as ash. The other warriors followed suit, one by one, until the entire camp was kneeling. Rurik walked to Darien and cut his bonds with a single stroke of his knife. Then he turned to face his warband. "This man," he said, pointing to Darien, "has done more for this camp in a few months than any of you have done in years. He saved my life. He saved your lives when he helped repel the attack. He has shown me that strength is not about cruelty, it is about choosing to be better every day." He took Darien's hand and raised it high. "He is not my prisoner, he is not my enemy, he is my equal, my partner, my heart, and anyone who cannot accept that is free to leave. Now." The camp was silent. The snow fell softly, covering the blood on the ground, covering the evidence of the night's violence. Then slowly, the warriors began to cheer. Even some of those who had followed Hakon joined in, their faces filled with relief. Hakon himself was dragged away, bound for a fate that Darien did not ask about. He did not need to know. He only needed to know that he was safe, that Rurik was safe, that they had survived. That night, Rurik and Darien stood on the edge of the camp, looking out at the forest bathed in moonlight. The snow had stopped falling, and the stars were bright overhead, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The world was quiet and still, and for the first time in years, both of them felt at peace. "You came back for me," Darien said. "You could have let them kill me. You could have taken your place as chieftain without opposition. It would have been easier. Safer." Rurik turned to face him. His gray-black eyes were soft in the moonlight, filled with a tenderness that no one else had ever seen. "I would burn this world to ash for you," he said. "I would fight every battle, kill every enemy, cross every sea. You are not my weakness, Darien. You are my reason. You are the reason I wake up in the morning. You are the reason I keep fighting. You are the reason I believe that there is still good in this world." Darien reached up and touched Rurik's face, tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the moment you laughed at my joke, since the moment you held me in the storm, since the moment you looked at me and saw a person instead of a prisoner. I love you, Rurik, and I will love you until the stars fall from the sky." Rurik kissed him then, deep and slow and full of promise. The stars shone, and the snow glittered, and the world felt impossibly large and impossibly small at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "What happens now?" Darien asked. Rurik took his hand and led him back toward the tent. "Now," he said, "we live, we fight, we love, and when the gods finally call us home, we go together." He paused at the entrance to the tent and looked back at Darien, his eyes bright with hope. "You are not my prisoner anymore, Darien. You are my home. You are my heart. You are everything." Darien stepped into the tent, into the warmth, into the arms of the man who had tried to break him and had been broken himself instead. He was not a prisoner. He was not a pawn. He was something else entirely, something Rurik had created with courage and sacrifice, and an unspoken bond that had grown into something unbreakable. He was loved, he was safe, he was home, and he would never leave. The next morning, Darien woke to find Rurik watching him. The Jarl was propped on one elbow, his gray-black eyes soft in the morning light. The sun was rising over the camp, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, and the world was quiet and still. "You are still here," Rurik said. "I was afraid you might have changed your mind. I was afraid that last night was just the cold talking, or the blood loss, or the fear." Darien smiled. "I do not change my mind. It is one of my more annoying qualities. Ask anyone who has ever tried to argue with me." He reached out and touched Rurik's face, his fingers tracing the scar that ran from the Jarl's temple to his jaw. "I told you before, I do not kneel. I will never kneel, not to you, not to anyone, but I will stand beside you. I will fight beside you. I will love beside you until the end." Rurik leaned down and kissed him. "That is all I've ever wanted," he said. "Not your submission, your presence, your strength, your heart, just you." They lay together for a long time, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered camp. The world was quiet and still, and for the first time in years, both of them felt at peace. Darien had not broken. He had not knelt. He had not surrendered his pride or his principles or his promise to the woman he had loved and lost. But he had found something he had not been looking for, a love that had grown in the unlikeliest of places, between a prisoner and his captor, between two men who had every reason to hate each other and had somehow chosen to love instead. It was not the ending either of them had expected. It was not the ending anyone would have predicted. But it was the ending they had written together, word by word, day by day, moment by moment. And it was perfect.